The film we are talking about today is a bombastic adventure through a fantastical wasteland that bears little resemblance to our own world. And yet, it may be more relevant to our world than ever. So fasten your seatbelts, listeners, and witness us as we die historic on the Fury Road! Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tess Adair, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Von Buren, Tessa's mother and also a writer. In the podcast today, we are discussing Mad Max: Fury Road. Directed by George Miller, written by George Miller, Brendan McCarthy, and Nico Lathuris. Cinematography by John Seal, who also did The English Patient in 1996 and Witness in 1985. So his background is a little bit different.
He apparently came out of retirement to do this.
That makes sense. I mean, if he did Witness in 1985, he's older than me. So yeah. Executive producers on this movie included, there were like 14 of them, included Stephen Mnuchin, who was the Secretary of the Treasury in the first Trump administration. Just a little thing I'm throwing out there, a little piece of trivia for the good listeners, because I thought that was funny. But he's apparently just this big time investor who does invest in a lot of stuff, and that's why he was an EP on this. So
yeah, that was his background. Anyway. I think he's an EP on quite a few movies, actually.
Yeah, I think he probably is. Yeah, that's what I read about him. So you want to do the summary?
So my summary, I basically took the IMDb one and edited it a little bit, so this is not fully my own words, but I kind of thought the IMDb one was slightly incorrect, so here it is. In a post-apocalyptic wasteland, Imperator Furiosa rebels against the tyrannical ruler Immortan Joe in order to help his enslaved wives escape him, and plans to take them to her homeland known as the Green Place. Along the way, they pick up a lost war boy and the eponymous drifter himself, Mad Max.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. And actually, that's a lot more plot than I would have assigned to this movie in my memory. And I will say that I watched this a month ago, right before it was going off of Netflix. And I did not have the strength, psychological strength, I think, to watch it again, because I found it to be pretty distressing for the most part in a lot of different ways that we'll get to. And I thought, no, I don't need to watch this again. I never need to see it again. I have now experienced at least 2 Mad Max movies. I did see the one with Tina Turner back in the 80s.
Oh, interesting. That's the only one I haven't seen. So between the two of us, we've seen all of them.
Well, the only reason I would go to see something like this is if Tina Turner were in it. So I did go to see it. Don't remember anything about it. That's the thing about these Mad Max movies. They don't stay with you. You know, I mean, you get the general idea and the general gist, and you feel for it. You could tell people basically, it's just a post-apocalyptic story set in a wilderness full of sand.
I feel completely the opposite. I love.
I know. I think it's fascinating. You did tell me that you loved it.
Yeah.
So.
I guess a little bit of background. Well, first I'll start with my background with Mad Max. I had never seen any of them before I saw this movie. And then I loved this movie so much. I think I saw it twice in theaters. You do lose a little bit of something if you don't see it on a big screen, because I do think that it's a visual movie. I do know, I've done a bit of research into how the movie was made. It took a long time to get this movie out. George Miller first had the initial idea for it in like 1989, but it didn't quite work out, and then it kind of went through a couple of different iterations. They got pretty serious about making it in like 1999, 2000-ish, and then basically 9/11 happened right before, and in that version it was going to be Mel Gibson, because in case anyone doesn't know, Mel Gibson played Mad Max in all of the other Mad Max movies, but in this one, Mad Max is played by Tom Hardy. And the reason given is generally that by the time they made this movie, Mel Gibson was too old, but also by the time they made this movie, Mel Gibson had a lot of controversies going on in his personal life that I think made him a bit more difficult to employ. Many of them, I'll just come out and say it, he said some really racist and anti-Semitic things that were recorded, so we know that he said those things. But usually when asked about it, George Miller seems to just say that he was too old. I'm guessing he probably doesn't want to get into the controversy. But yeah, so they were originally going to make it around 2000, and then 9/11 happened, and apparently that tanked the American dollar against the Australian dollar, and that just made it too expensive to make at the time. So they postponed it and postponed it. For a time period, they were going to make it as an animated movie, but then eventually they went back to live action, and eventually Charlize Theron was cast, and then Tom Hardy was cast as the new Mad Max.
Well, and, I will say here that George Miller himself is kind of old. He is 80.
Mm-hmm.
I looked him up to see what movies he's Australian, to see what other movies he's actually...
His career is wild.
Yeah, okay, so let me see if I can pull up some of these movies here.
He co-wrote the first Babe movie and then directed the second Babe movie.
That's wild.
Yeah, and then he also wrote and directed Happy Feet. So at one point he was thinking about making this movie, and then it got too expensive, and then instead he made Happy Feet, the Penguin movie.
So he made the first two movies, Mad Max and Mad Max 2.
Yeah.
He also made Thunderdome, which was, I think that's the one with Tina. Yes, and The Witches of Eastwick, Lorenzo's Oil, Babe. He didn't direct it, but you're right, he did write it. And Babe is all about the writing. I mean, that's where the story is. The directing is good too, but the story is the thing.
It is adapted from a book, so he didn't come up with the story himself, but he did. Okay. He co-wrote the script.
That's a wild. What? That's a wild range.
Yeah.
I mean, from Babe, which anybody of any age could watch, children or older people. It's a lovely.
It's a great movie.
Beautiful, humane film. I mean, just a wonderful, beautiful film, which I would not have seen myself saying about a movie about a pig, but it was gorgeous. It was just really well done.
I honestly do think that movie, probably more than any other movie, is why I'm a vegetarian. I think the messaging of that movie is so empathetic to the animals that I think it is a big, I think it made an impression on me as a kid. And because I know that the first reason that I decided to stop eating meat was because of pigs. I've kept reading that pigs are as smart as dogs, and I just got to a point where I could not eat pig meat anymore, and I think Babe was a big part of why.
Well, and I got to tell you too that one of the things I love about Babe is that the pig's owner calls her pig all the time.
Yeah.
I do that with my cats and my dogs. I do that. I say cat, dog. It's just it's something that I found to be really realistic and also beautiful. And, he doesn't say it with any acrimony. He says it as a recognition that this animal is a creature, that's not, maybe on the same plane of existence as we are, but he has a lot of respect for that creature. I loved that film. I thought it had a great sensibility.
Well, and to make George Miller's background even more complex, he did not begin as a filmmaker. He studied to be a doctor and spent years as a doctor, and actually that was apparently part of the impetus for the first Mad Max film, was all of the violence that he saw while working in the ER. And also, apparently, he lost 3 friends as an adolescent to car crashes. So I guess, this was a really, where he lived in Australia, there were a lot of car crashes. So that was part of how the first Mad Max came to be.
That's pretty wild. Well, so getting back to the description of the movie, it stars Tom Hardy, Charlize Theron, Zoe Kravitz, Nicholas Hoult, who played Lex Luthor in the most recent Superman movie, but also was a child actor in About a Boy.
Also, where I first came aware of Nicholas Hoult was in the British TV show Skins, which was it's a teen show. So that was after About a Boy, but before he started doing movies as an adult. He played Tony, basically the main character in Skins. The first 2 seasons anyway. Yeah.
So we also have Riley Keough. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
I think it's Keough.
Keough? Okay. So she is the granddaughter of Elvis Presley. There's a lot of character actors in here that I'm just going to pull out. Angus Sampson is in it. He is a character actor who I enjoy seeing in anything. He's just really wonderful. He's actually in the Netflix series Lincoln Lawyer, not based on, but kind of adapted from the original movie. And he's very good in that. I just like him in everything. But there are a lot of character actors in this that we have seen in other things. So the acting in this is not terrible. I think the problem that I have with the acting is that the characters leave a lot to be desired for me. And I mean, for a film that features a whole posse of women, very predominantly features them, the women were kind of shallow. And one was pregnant, which is, the biggest stereotype out there. There's always a pregnant woman. And all of them were dressed to please men. So while they weren't naked, their bodies were on display constantly. And
I mean, I would say that for the wives, that is true, but
that's what I'm talking about. The wives,
but they are not the only female characters in the movie.
No, they're not. But they are the predominant ones.
Furiosa isn't one of the wives, and she's the main character.
She's the same way. I will get to her in a minute. Her character is subdued to the point of. I mean, this is a woman who can act, and they don't let her act in this movie. I don't think. I think she's incredibly subdued. There's not a lot of subtlety to her character. She's pretty. Most of the characters pretty one-dimensional. I think she is too. Anyway, that's just my opinion on the characters. I'm not a big fan of this film, but why don't you talk a little bit about what you liked about it?
Sure. Just to kind of round out the background of the film, they were originally going to film in Namibia, but then it got changed to New Zealand. So the film has a very desert look to it.
Right.
It's always, apart from the first Mad Max film, it always takes place in this kind of desert wasteland. And unfortunately, the place that they were going to film in New Zealand had unexpected rains right before they were supposed to film, and it bloomed with wildflowers. So it was beautiful, but they could no longer film there. So then they went back to Namibia. And actually, George Miller had formerly known as Eve Ensler, an American playwright who is best known for the vagina monologues, consult on the script, and she really liked it and hung around to help promote some education about violence against women in Namibia while they were filming. So I have seen the first two Mad Max films. I watched them after I saw this one because I enjoyed this one so much, and then I watched the first one, and to be honest, I don't like the first one really at all. It's very slow. I will say it's a really impressive project because it was basically completely self-funded. It only cost $400,000 to make, and then it made
I remember that.
Multiple millions. I mean, it was a huge breakout hit. It was basically kind of the first big Australian hit that became big internationally. And it was kind of a total shock because, George Miller at the time, he was a doctor who played around with filmmaking on the weekends, and then with a couple of buddies created this production company, and then he contacted a journalist to help him write the script for the first one. And then they came out with Mad Max, and it was a huge hit. Like I said, I saw it. I didn't like it that much. I think it's tough to compare it to this one because it's much slower, and it is very low budget, and it almost doesn't feel like it takes place in the same universe. Or rather, you could kind of see it as the first one takes place before the apocalypse happens, and then the rest of them take place after the apocalypse happens. Because for starters, it's not filmed in the desert. It's not necessarily a lush, beautiful green place, but it's just a normal area. It does have
Arizona out in the desert.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's Australia, but but there are trees. There's grass.
It looks familiar. It looks familiar to us.
It looks like the normal world. Yeah.
Right.
And it's a world that still has television and neighborhoods. And Max, the character, does work for a force that is technically not the police. I don't remember what it's called, but it's something force. But basically, he's a cop. Basically, the first movie is he's a cop, and he's dealing with gangsters. And it's a little messy. His wife gets attacked, but she is still in the hospital in a coma, and it's not clear that she's going to die. And then Max goes off on his crazy revenge quest, and then at the end of the movie just walks off into the sunset and never goes and checks on his wife again. So it's a little messy, and I honestly think that was a mistake. I think it was a mistake of scripting.
I'm not sure because I have thought all of these films had such a almost repugnant male sensibility to them, that does not surprise me. I don't remember the film that well, and I have seen it. Doesn't surprise me. I mean, maybe Miller does think these movies are a warning about what you should not do or become, or how maybe that's what he means. But the men who go to see this, that's not what they're seeing. You and I may see that, but it's like it's an adolescent fantasy about men in just the most desperate circumstances.
Yeah.
Running the world.
I do think that for the first 2 or 3, that is largely true. Although I will say, I think, so I've seen the second one as well, The Road Warrior. And I actually liked that one a lot more than the first one. For starters, it has a lot more plot. And secondly, George Miller hasn't really said this, but he was basically drawn to make a second one because he thought he could do a better job than they did in the first one, because he had more money, because the first one was so successful, and he had much more, the style that we now associate with Mad Max, where the characters are all wearing like crazy leather outfits that look sort of BDSM-y, and like the cars are
steampunk. Steampunk is what I was looking for earlier. It's a steampunk style. Yeah.
It's kind of steampunk. Technically steampunk.
I don't mean just the clothes. I mean the whole, the sets and everything are very steampunk. Thing is,
they're not using steam. A gas punk, I think you could call it, probably.
What is it?
Gas punk, because they're using gas-powered engines. The thing is, steampunk refers to a specific kind of fantasy where all of the technology is powered by steam. And it does have a very specific fashion to it. It's usually a kind of Victorian plus clockworky fashion.
Yeah.
And this is definitely in that realm, especially because both of them are very associated with like crazy goggles. But like technically, Mad Max is not steampunk because they're not using steam-powered technology. But you could call it gas punk because they are using gas. But yeah, so the second one has a lot more of that style that we associate with Mad Max. And it's not just the outfits, it's also like the crazy cars. The cars that have been like super
my God,
like, souped up, which is in the first one a little bit, but it's much subtler.
Yeah, this one was crazy. I mean, and it would be 3 or 4 cars attached, so they could have 2 things attached and another car on top. Like the Beetle that's on top that they're all sitting, the women are sitting in, is on top of basically a big truck that's attached to another truck. It's insane. And you got to wonder why. Why did they create these things to look like this? What was the advantage? Why couldn't they just fix up the cars or the trucks? Why do they have to put them together like that? I don't really understand that.
I think the real answer is that George Miller liked the look of it, but apparently they did write a whole internal history that does explain it. I don't know if that's something that you can actually access, but supposedly there are reasons. But to be honest, when I watch the movie, I don't really need there to be a reason, and I guess I'll just talk about what I like about the movie and why I'm not bothered by it the way that you are. I do kind of put Mad Max Fury Road in a different category than the previous movies. I do think that the previous movies are a lot of what you're talking about, where it's just kind of this celebration of violence. Although I think the second movie has much more of a theme to it, much more of a like good versus evil theme to it. In the second one, Max is already that drifter character, so he doesn't have a family to go back to, and basically he comes upon this situation where these really violent people are attacking this like busload full of like pacifists and children, and he has to intercede on their behalf. So I think the second one has much more of an actual like conflict and moral core to it. Although I definitely think there is still an argument to be made there that it's still ultimately in the service of glorifying violence, but I think that's kind of a question for a lot of these movies that aim to be about questioning violence, but also in order to do that have to portray violence. I mean, this is a thing for a lot of like anti-war movies. Can you ever make an anti-war movie when explosions always look really cool on camera? Like, if you're visually portraying violence, inevitably the kind of bias of the film's lens is going to make it look cool to a lot of people, even if the point is that the violence is horrific and unjustified. And I think that that is also a question in this movie. But I do think that George Miller, he has talked about how as he got older, after making the first 3 movies, he kind of had a bit of a feminist awakening and wanted to write this movie to be a little bit more about the harm that men do women and women fighting against that and escaping it. And that is basically, like, the plot of the movie is that the Immortan Joe is keeping these women enslaved, and Furiosa is a woman who is capable of violence and has worked her way up in his organization and uses her position to help these women escape. And I agree that, you know, they are pretty scantily clad, and you can kind of make a couple of different arguments about that. I would say the argument in defense of that is, of course they're scantily clad. They have been controlled by Immortan Joe all their lives. He probably didn't allow them any other clothes. That being said, it is a movie and decisions were made. You know, like they probably could have found a way to give the women more clothing, but I do think that this movie is aimed at men, and that ultimately this movie is meant for men to self-reflect on their violence. I think that's thematically what's happening.
This is my problem. I understand that he wants men to self-reflect on violence. I don't think he's done that successfully in this film, where he is making the violence so entertaining. It's not realistic. It's not horrifying. It's entertaining. It's funny. So if he truly wants to show men that violence is a bad thing, maybe he needs to stop making these movies, because men are not going to see these movies to be taught a morality lesson. They are going to see things blown up and violence, and that is it tears at my heart. Why would you make a film like this that glorifies violence in an attempt to say violence is bad? It's not working for me. I'm not making that connection.
Well, for starters, I'll talk a little bit about the audience reaction. So this film, I believe this was the most commercially successful of any of the
I think it was.
Mad Max films. And I think for the people who went to see it who were not fans of Mad Max previously, I think it was pretty uncontroversial. But I do know that a lot of the men who went to see it who were fans of Mad Max were pissed off that Charlize Theron is actually the main character. Like there was a lot of discourse among them at the time that, like, why is this even a Mad Max movie when Max isn't really the main character, even though he's like kind of listed as the main character. But ultimately it is more Furiosa's story. It's her decisions that start the plot. It's kind of it is more about her than it is about him. And I think neither of them have a ton of dialogue, but at most you could argue that they're both the main character.
And the lack of dialogue, I think, is another thing that bothered me, especially with Tom Hardy's character. I would have liked to have seen them share the screen in the sense that they were both fully fleshed out characters, because I think they both present a conflict between, genders, but also a complement. And I like that he is able to change and grow over the course of the movie, but there's something missing in the beginning. We don't know why he is the way he is. He's pretty animalistic. He doesn't talk much. He grunts. I mean, literally animalistic, and we don't know how he got to that. Why is he? Who is he? You have to take every movie you see, unless it's a, Star Trek, on its own merit. You can't bring in other storylines. You can't bring in that movie from 1979 or whenever it was and say, well, this is his background. You have to give the background in this movie. And they don't do that. They don't tell us. And I'm sitting here watching this, and I don't remember who Mad Max is. What's his story? What's the apocalypse? What happened? I don't remember. We're supposed to know this? What if you've never seen it before?
The other movies would not answer those questions for you.
Max, so that's a problem.
It's not a problem for me, but I can see why it's a problem for you. Max is kind of not really meant to be a whole character. I mean, honestly, in the other movies, he's kind of like the archetype of the cowboy, but even more removed from society.
And I'm gonna talk about that in a little bit. He is definitely the cowboy. Yeah.
But yeah,
and he comes in to save the town.
Yeah, he's kind of just meant to be this very traumatized person who sort of rolls into these situations, helps, and then rolls out of them again. And that's what, apart from the first movie, that's kind of what happens each time. And, you were talking about the dialogue. It is intentional that there's very little dialogue. When George Miller was coming up with this, instead of writing a script, he teamed up with a group of artists and created a really intense storyboard instead. So it was basically conceived almost as like a comic book. So it was conceived visuals first. He wanted it to
makes sense.
To be kind of like a silent film, but with noise. So that's why the dialogue is so minimal and kind of adds, so like you could watch this movie on mute and you would basically know what happened. Like the dialogue
I think
adds something
that's
to
cheating.
it.
I think that's cheating. If you make a movie, you need to have fucking dialogue, and excuse my language.
I mean, there are literally silent films. Silent films exist. So are those?
We're not in silent.
You?
We're not in that era anymore. We are almost 100 years past that era. In fact, we are literally 100 years past that era. So he's making this exorbitantly expensive movie, and he can't be bothered to put writing into it, to put dialogue into it.
I'm sorry, saying he can't be bothered. He created an intense storyboard. It isn't about can't be bothered. It's that he wanted the visuals to come first. I think it is disingenuous to claim that this is somehow a lack of effort. He put a ton of effort into the storyboard and into the visuals. It's just a different way of telling the story. And I understand, like, if you're a very dialogue-focused person, it's frustrating to you. But I would just argue, I'm
a very character-driven person. If you don't have dialogue, you don't have character development. And he has none in this movie, as far as I'm concerned.
I disagree, but I can see why you feel that way. I do think that the characters are a little bit more minimalistic, but I feel like I understand who each of the main characters are. I've already said who I think Mad Max is. He's kind of, a highly traumatized, sort of barely human person who's basically just surviving and keeps ending up in these situations where his long latent morality forces him to eventually intervene on behalf of the people who need it. Furiosa is a woman who has had to learn the ways of violence in order to protect herself, and we never really get the full story behind it, but she says that she's looking for redemption, which implies, and both that and her place in the hierarchy imply that she has done some bad things in order to save herself, in order to move up to where she is, and now she's decided to use that leverage that she has to help the most vulnerable people near her. And then we have the pregnant character who I'm probably just going to call Splendid. They refer to her as Splendid a couple of times. Her whole name is the Splendid Angarad.
Yeah, it's kind of wild.
Yeah, and so she's kind of the leader of the wives. It's implied that she's the one who wanted them to run away. It's her line that they repeat a couple of times is "We are not things." That's kind of the theming that we jump off with, because as soon as they leave with Furiosa and Joe realizes what's going on, he goes to where he keeps them, and they've written on the wall, "We are not things," and they've also written "Who killed the world," which also comes up a couple of times, and the implied answer is men killed the world. Men and their violence killed the world. So the Splendid Angarad, I mean, she's the leader, and she's the one who originated a form of feminist thought among the wives, basically. She's the one who told them we are not things, and she's the one who, at least it is implied, went to Furiosa to get them out. And when she, spoiler alert, dies, they are all quite distraught, and it almost breaks apart their group because she was the one keeping them together. It was kind of her will that got this going.
And then the baby dies too, right?
Yes. Yeah, she's pregnant. Her baby also dies. And then the other wives, there's Zoe Kravitz playing Toast the Knowing. She kind of just seems like the least naive among them. I mean, there are so many characters that I will admit, I don't think anyone gets a super deep characterization. I think it would be impossible to do that in the runtime, considering how many freaking characters there are, and also that it's an action movie with a lot of action in it. But I do think you get a sketch that Toast the Knowing is the most with it, the least naive. And then there's the Dag, who's the weird one and my personal favorite. And again, it is kind of a type, but she's one of those characters who's really socially weird and says strange things, but also seems to have an almost preternatural sense of things that are coming. So she's the one who always alerts them when they're about to be overtaken by Joe's guys. She always seems to be the one who notices first and says it in kind of an offbeat way. She's also the one who says the most amount of weird slang, and every time they use slang in these movies, I always have a moment where I'm like, is this made up for this world, or is this just Australian slang? Because Australian slang is kind of wild. Mm-hmm. And then there's Riley Keough as Capable. So she's the one who kind of has the little romantic subplot with the war boy. And I'm putting it that way because, there's not really enough time and there's no implication that they actually get together, but basically her kindness towards him gets him to completely change sides. And I do want to talk about the war boy at some point. His name is Nux, Nicholas Holt's character Nux, because I think
he's a very interesting character. I think we should talk about him too. Yeah.
I think he goes on the strongest, clearest arc. And because of that,
the only
kind
arc,
of ends up, it kind of ends up with the strongest characterization because of that arc. Because Furiosa doesn't really change throughout the movie. She just kind of discovers that in the 20 years that she's been gone, her home is gone. That's kind of the biggest thing that she goes through that changes her. For the most part, she knows what's right at the beginning and she knows what's right at the end, and it's her vision that's guiding us through.
She's a pretty linear character. She's on a mission, and she's not gonna vary from that. I think we do need to talk about Nuck, but first let's just talk about Max a little bit. We start off with Max being pursued and caught and brought to the leader, whose name
Joe. Immortan Joe.
So apparently they know who he is. He's got some kind of a reputation that precedes him, and that's why they catch him. And Nuck keeps him tied to the front of his vehicle for a third of the film. You know, he's driving this car with him at the front, and he's getting beaten up by rocks and sand, and every time that the car hits something.
Yeah, they're using him as a quote-unquote blood bag. So the war boys, which are basically the guys that work for Joe.
He's got the perfect blood. Or
he's a universal donor.
He's a universal donor. So how did they know that? How did they find him? How did they know that? We don't know any of that.
I actually don't even know that they do know who he is before they capture him, because I feel like their mission is to just go and capture people in order to use them, either to enslave them in one way or another, or the way that they use, because I feel like the implication is that they capture people and use them to donate things, body parts, blood, to the war boys, because the war boys, they keep saying that the war boys have a half-life. It's kind of implied that there's some kind of genetic mutants or something, and that they don't live very long. They're basically manufactured to be these kind of warriors, but they're not manufactured very well. We never really know if the war boys are human or if they're like clones or what, but it's definitely
hints
implied,
of all of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's implied that they're not quite human, that there's something manufactured about them, and that they're all kind of sickly or on the road to sickliness. So Nux, when Joe sends people out after Furiosa because he realizes she's betrayed him, Nux is sick and is initially not going to be sent out, and they've hooked him up to Mad Max as a blood bag, in theory to extend his life. And he basically decides, well, I want to go, as he says, if I am to die, I will die historic on the Fury Road. And so Nux basically comes up with the idea that he'll just bring Max along with him and strap him to the front of their car. So that's what you were talking about. So yeah, I mean, that's, again, I think this is part of what pissed off so many of the men who went to see it, because Max spends a good third of the movie basically immobilized.
I think that bothered me too, because we know that Furiosa is the main character going into this, but Mad Max is the character that the franchise is built around. So you expect to have something from him. And what I was expecting in the writing and the character was a little bit more wisdom. And I realized that Mad Max is a crazy character in a lot of ways. I remember the Mel Gibson characterization a little bit. It's a vague memory. He was the kind of crazy that when the actor actually went crazy 36 years later, it didn't surprise us. But Tom Hardy brings a different sensibility to this role. Yeah. And you never quite think that he's crazy, but we don't know what to think about him. There's just no sense of who he is, how he got to where he is. I would have liked a little bit more, even if he didn't want to give him dialogue. I understand that, that it's a visual film and all that, but we just don't know anything about him, and I wanted more. I wanted to know who he was.
I get that, but I will say, Max never has a lot of dialogue in these movies. He doesn't talk a lot in the first or the second one either. And
however, this is a more realistic depiction of him, I think. Let me rephrase that. It seems like Miller came to this film with a little bit different sense of who Max is. He's not quite as overblown. He's not a comic book character. He's a guy who's had a hard life. And he says a couple things. I don't know, maybe it's flashbacks. I can't remember. But there's a reason why we empathize with him in the beginning, because something happens. Either he says it or we see it. He had some trauma. He's had some trauma in his life. And yet he's not crazy. He's not off the rails. So I would have liked a little more.
Yeah, he keeps hallucinating this little girl who's kind of begging for his help. And she sort of shows up either a couple times. She shows up in a way that helps him. It kind of helps him to like deflect a blow. But she also shows up to kind of remind him to do the right thing. And I will say, she has no clear precedent in the previous movies. I mean, like you were saying, that we don't really know who he is. Watching the previous movies in this franchise is not really going to make this movie make any more sense.
No, it's not.
Like, I actually kind of feel like, and again, since I haven't seen Thunderdome might be different enough to not really fall into this, but I kind of feel like, having now seen the first, the second, and this one, it almost feels like each one is a draft of the same story.
Yeah.
Like, the first Mad Max feels like the most rough draft, which is why I kind of think forgetting his wife at the end is just a mistake, because I sort of view that movie as the rough draft of what this story would eventually become. And then the second one is a bit more complex, a bit more is going on. It's definitely way more stylized. And then this one, I think, is kind of the most stylized and the most complex of a story. Even as it's not actually that complex a story, it works a lot better than the previous drafts.
It's almost like he went back and for each successive movie said, nah, I didn't quite get that right. I'm going to redo it. Nah, I didn't quite get that right. I'm going to redo it. And he's done this 5 or 6 times now.
Oh, also, this is kind of neither here nor there, but I did want to mention, around when he made Thunderdome, he also apparently directed a couple of Tina Turner music videos. So I guess they got along.
That's true. That's true. I remember that. And one of them was a video for the movie, but yeah.
So the thing that I kind of want to say about the movie, and I don't even think this is necessarily in disagreement with your point about it, it's more just my take on what's happening, which is I think this movie is masculinity camp. I think it's almost drag. Like, it's so over the top and bombastic and crazy. And some of the war boys are portrayed as stupid. Like, Nux in particular, he's kind of dumb. Like,
oh yeah, he is. But Max isn't. Max is not dumb. You can tell from the beginning.
Max is different. Max is not a part of this society.
He's the outsider cowboy, yes.
So I think, like, part of what I see happening in this movie, again, like, I'm not going to disagree that, it might not be the best way to reach men who are really into this, like, hyper-masculinity stuff. But the way that I see it is that it's like a drag version of hypermasculinity, where it's almost where it is satirizing itself. It's just so over the top and unrealistic. I love the visuals. I find explosions fun to watch. The part where they're all on those big sticks and they're like moving back and forth like a swing in order to like hit the other cars. It's so crazy and stupid and also super fun to watch. It's almost like watching a circus act, you know? The war boys have this like religious ideology that sort of keeps them brainwashed and keeps them sacrificing themselves for Immortan Joe. I think that is kind of a drag version of a lot of this hyper macho kind of rhetoric that we have in the real world. And I simultaneously find it kind of fun to mimic and also kind of intentionally silly and stupid. You can't really say, "Witness me," and like spray silver spray paint on your mouth and not feel stupid, you know? Like it's simultaneously fun, and I can definitely see people seeing that as just glorifying that kind of masculinity, but I think it's so over the top and silly that to me it makes it very clear how dumb it is, you know? Like, he's literally spraying spray paint on his mouth and screaming, "Witness me." I used to quote this movie whenever my cat would do a particularly dumb run and jump onto something. I would go, "Witness me!"
See, I don't even understand what they're doing there. There's and here's another thing about that is that there is so much chaos in this film that I would estimate at least half the time I don't really know even what's going on. So I've never understood that. I saw them doing that over and over again. And what does that even mean? Why are they spray painting their mouth? This makes no sense to me. Can you explain it?
I don't know if I can explain the spray paint. I think it's just kind of... So they're all obsessed with shiny and chrome, right? If something is good, it's shiny and chrome. And the thing that they're spraying is like a silver spray paint thing. Maybe it's getting them high. You know, it could kind of be like when you do like whippets or whatever. But I think it's more just like it's meant to evoke religious ritual, but in a kind of silly way. Because they all like silly, they also talk about being awaited in Valhalla. They all believe that if they sacrifice their life for Immortan Joe in the right way, that then they will gain eternity in Valhalla with Joe. And this is a big part of Nux's character. Should we go ahead and talk about Nux for a bit?
Yeah, let's talk about Nux. I thought it was Nuck, N-U-K.
I think it's N-U-X, Nux.
Okay.
Nux is the war boy that we follow, and he's the one that Max is donating his blood to unwillingly. And so he ends up kind of becoming our third most important character after Max
he definitely
and Furiosa. And he is initially your perfect war boy. He's totally brainwashed. He totally wants to die for Immortan Joe. That is his goal in life. I mean, he's literally like, he should be too sick to go out, but he finds a way to by chaining Max to the front of his car. And for the first roughly half of the movie, that's all he wants to do is just find a way to prove himself to Joe, hopefully by dying for him. That is actively his goal. But he's also not very smart and not actually very good at it. And unfortunately for him, his blood bag is Max, who actually is very competent. You know, one of the few things that we know about Max is that he is super competent at violence and at getting himself out of things and at outsmarting stupid war boys.
But he fails at it over and over again because Nux has all these followers who work with him and gang up on him. So if it were just one-on-one, he would have escaped him win every time, early on. But every time he turns around, Nux has 20 people helping him, so it's stacked against him.
His first big escape attempt, he doesn't know where he is, so he basically ends up coming out the side of like a cliff. There's nowhere for him to go. But yeah, Max and Nux are in Nux's car. Nux does have like a weapons guy, a lancer in the back of the car, but he kind of gets blown off of the car. During the chase, they all end up in this sandstorm, and that's basically where the plot kind of starts to turn, because in the sandstorm, Nux locks Max out of the car, so Max has to like suffer through the sandstorm. But then when their car finally stops, they're the closest to the war rig where Furiosa is. I think, I can't exactly, I think Max knocks out Nux and then drags him over to where Furiosa and the women are. And I will say that moment is kind of, for me, the most obvious male gaze moment, because when he comes up on the war rig, all the wives are outside bathing with the hose, basically.
Yeah.
And Max has a clear moment of like, he was not expecting to see women. And so
And they're all beautiful. They're all beautiful.
Yeah, they're all gorgeous. Yeah, and scantily clad. And yeah, so he has a moment where he like freezes and stares at them. Then he basically has a little one-on-one fight with Furiosa, where they kind of each keep getting the upper hand. And I think the point of that fight is to demonstrate how competent they both are, because it's a really like drag down, knuckles out fight. Like they literally keep knocking each other over. Furiosa doesn't have her arm on. So one thing that we haven't mentioned is Furiosa only has one whole arm, and then her other one is like a mechanical prosthetic that she doesn't have on during her fight with Max. So she's kind of at a particular disadvantage. I've always felt that the implication of that is if she'd had her arm on, she probably would have won. But, he just barely...
during that fight, I didn't even notice her arm until she was done and she stood up. And then I don't remember her having half an arm, and then she puts her prosthesis on. I thought, oh, well, I guess it fell off during the fight. But then I wasn't paying as close of attention to these kinds of things. And I just, the fights, I look away when the fights go on. And that's the other thing, is some of these scenes, the fights, just drag on for so long. And I just lose interest.
Most of the movie is action scenes. That's... Yeah. Definitely true. It's basically one long chase scene interrupted by fight scenes. But yeah, she actually just doesn't have it on the whole time. It's like hanging off of the war rig.
Okay.
I think because they're all kind of taking a break. That they've just been through the sandstorm, and they've kind of got to like clear some stuff out, wash themselves off, before they get going again. So I think that's why she's got it off. She's refreshing herself too. So he ultimately does get the upper hand, and he gets them to use their bolt cutter to extricate him from the war boy. This is definitely the turning point for Max, because essentially this scene ends in him joining Furiosa and the wives and helping them out. It's the beginning of Nux's turning point, because he still thinks at this point that he and Max are going to take the wives back to Joe and receive their reward. So he's super excited. But ultimately they leave Nux behind, and then he goes back to Joe and tells Joe that he's been there and he's going to get his wives back for him. And he does try. Joe gives him a gun and tells him to shoot Furiosa in the head, and that he will be awaited in Valhalla. And Nux is so excited, and he jumps onto the war rig and almost immediately trips on his own chain and falls. And Immortan Joe says mediocre in response, which has also become a bit of a meme. The two big memes from this movie are mediocre and Max saying that's bait when they get to where the other women are. Nux fails in his mission and basically hides out on the war rig in his shame until one of the wives, Riley Keough as capable, finds him, and he's basically crying to himself, and she gets him to explain why, and she kind of touches him tenderly. I don't remember the exact content of their discussion, but basically he shows her the two things on his neck, the two growths on his neck that are, I guess, going to kill him eventually. And he's named them, I think, Barry and Larry.
Yeah.
And he's drawn a little face on each of them.
There is some humor in this film, I will say.
Sure. A lot of it from Nux. He's kind of our biggest comic relief character. Yeah. But it's her finding him that really turns him around, because basically he's an abused teenage boy. We don't know exactly how old he is, but he's, somewhere late teens to early 20s.
19, 20, yeah.
Very young man who is abused and neglected, and she is essentially the first person ever who has shown him softness and kindness and care, and it immediately changes his whole
and why
thing.
Wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it? It made perfect sense to me when it happened, because I thought he's probably never had a mother. He's not had a female influence in his life, and he is he's got a female sensibility. I mean, he's very fragile through most of it. I mean, what I mean by female sensibility is the way we are typically depicted in film as as being, weak and fragile. But he's
and
also
self-sacrificial.
sensitive.
Yeah.
Self-sacrificial and also sensitive. He is very sensitive. That's why when he makes that mistake, when he trips, it crushes him. He's very very sensitive. And here is somebody who can see that in him and see that he's just this torn little boy, this traumatized little boy who never got to grow up, who never had a family, who never had anybody show him any kindness, and he falls madly in love with her. Of course.
Immediately. Yeah.
Immediately. Yeah.
He tells her that he has had at this point 2 or 3 he has stood at the gates of Valhalla 3 times, I think he says, and each time he was spared, and he thinks that it's because he was being saved for something particularly great. So basically each time he has almost died but not died, it has reaffirmed for him this belief that he's going to do something so great for Joe that he'll be, the greatest of all. He'll die historic on the Fury Road. And now he has failed right in front of him. And actually, at the time that she talks to him, Splendid has already died, and he knows that she died, and he knows that Joe knows that he was on the rig when she died. So that's a part of his shame, that Joe's favorite of the wives has died, and he wasn't able to save her. Yeah, so that's why he's kind of curled up in his shame, and that idea comes home to roost for him at the end. The idea that he's been saved for something particularly great, that's basically what fuels his eventual death. So he changes over to their side. The two of them, him and Capable, are kind of pictured together for the rest of the movie whenever you see one of them. It's definitely a two-way street. Like, you never really know. It's not clear that she falls in love with him the same way, but you can tell that she does care about him. Her caring for him is genuine. She argues to the rest of them that they should let him help because, he's just a boy, basically.
Well, it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast thing. She takes this beastly boy and kind of softens him, and he becomes the caring human being that anybody would want to be in our society anyway. Maybe not in this post-apocalyptic one where savagery is respected rather than kindness. But he kind of gives it back to her, and she sees that. And plus, young men and women, they're attracted to each other. That's just a natural part of life. And I think it makes perfect sense. They kind of help each other. And I can't remember, but he does get killed at the end?
Yeah, so at the climax of the film, after they run away and they find the Volvolini, who are the women that Furiosa comes from.
The Volvolini.
Yeah, it's not very subtle. They discover that the green place is gone. So the green place is where they have been trying to go to this whole time, and at some point in the last 20 years, the ground soured and it disappeared. At first, they decide that they're just going to try to drive across the waste for as far as they can go and hope that they find somewhere. But eventually, Max is visited again by his hallucination, and then he stops them and says, hey, we know where there's a green place. It's where you came from. So they decide that they're going to turn around and basically try to beat the other convoy through the mountain pass and then block it off behind them. And that's what they do. And at the climax of the film, Joe's vehicle gets in front of them, and Furiosa kills Joe. And so all of the women get onto that vehicle, and so does Max. And Nux stays behind to drive the war rig. And he tells Capable that he will jump over at the last possible second. But then one of the bad guys gets onto his vehicle and is trying to kill Capable. So Nux backs up, like slows down so that he can't get her, and then has this moment where he realizes this is his time. This is the great thing that he's been saved for.
Here's this little boy who has grown up in a matter of hours. He has matured into a caring adult human being. Yeah. Something that you would normally expect to take 20, 30, 40 years. It takes most of us that long. But he does it in a matter of hours. And maybe that is something to do with his very shortened lifespan. And it hasn't been allowed to happen. He has not been allowed to maturationally develop under Joe. But in this part of his life where he goes off on this crusade and helps the women, and then they all decide they're going to come back and take over the the homestead and make it their own and make it more fair. In that mission gives his life so much purpose that he's okay with sacrificing himself because he knows he has a shortened lifespan anyway. Why not give that life toward a good cause? He's a hero. He is the hero of the film in my mind.
So yeah, as he's looking at her, he whispers, "Witness me," and then destroys the war rig, basically. Blocks off the pass. Yeah, it's very sweet, and it's a real. I mean, he has the strongest arc of any character in the film for sure.
Yes, the only arc really, but yeah,
the other characters don't really change, although arguably they do change the world.
And I think actually that his arc and his sacrifice redeems this film for me just a little bit. Nobody else really. I mean, I know they win in the end. She's going to be the supreme leader, and you can see put a woman in charge. She's going to make sure this is a much more fair society. At least we hope. She seems to have that in her mind.
It's implied that it's not just her, because when they do get back to the Citadel, it cuts to the milking mothers who have been left behind, and they open up the water. They unleash the water for the people. And the implication is that now that these women are in charge, they're not going to be hoarding the water anymore.
Yeah, and using it to punish people and to get people to do what they want them to. It's not,
control them.
It's to control them. It's a real brutal approach to governing.
I was going to say, I think that's part of why Max is not a wise character in this movie, because the wisdom lives with the women. It's the women who have this wisdom. One of the Volvolini, the keeper of the seeds, I think that's actually her only name. She's the keeper of the seeds. She's got this bag full of seeds that they hope to one day plant when the earth can support it again. And it
should be noted that she also loses her life. They have the seeds, but she dies. Yeah.
I think all the Volvolini die. I think only the wives and Furiosa and Max survive. I'm not 100% sure, but we definitely see
there's a lot of death. And as I said before, there's so much chaos and destruction. It's hard to know what's happening at many points in the film, including who's getting killed, which is why I could not remember if Nux got killed at the end. But but I think I do remember that the keeper of the seeds died, because I remember her holding onto the bag and thinking, somebody needs to get that bag.
She basically dies protecting Furiosa, because it's when the guys, I don't really know what to call it, the guys on the wavy stilts that are flying back and forth.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, they're coming to attack Furiosa, and she pops out of the top to protect her and ends up, I think, basically getting stabbed near the neck, although we never really see the injury.
She gets injured very badly, Yeah,
and she basically slowly bleeds out in the cab, but she does manage to do one more big thing before she dies, and then she does die, and the dag ends up taking her bag. And actually, I wanted to mention, her first interaction with the dag is kind of one of my favorite interactions in the movie. So they reach the Volvolini. The green place is gone, but the Volvolini are still somehow surviving out in the wilderness. And the dag is the weird one of the wives. And she interacts with the keeper of the seeds. These names are so ridiculous. And she asks the keeper of the seeds if she's ever killed anybody. And the keeper says that she kills everyone that she meets out here. And the dag says, somehow I thought you ladies would be above all that. And the keeper is basically you gotta do what you gotta do to survive. And she also has a moment where she grabs her face and says, this one has all her teeth. There's kind of a visual implication that the Volvolini have become essentially masculinized by their need to survive. They no longer, they comment on how soft the wives' skin it is, and how protected they look like they've been, whereas the Volvolini are much older, and their skin looks like the skin of people who have been out in the desert.
They're old. They are hags. They are literally hags, and there's something about the hag, the witch, that image and that symbolism that is perfect here, because they generally, the hags, I mean, there's a lot of stories out there about hags, but generally they're portrayed as evil, but not in modern times. We tend to think of hags anymore in feminism in terms of being women who have survived.
Yeah.
Despite trauma and loss and whatever they've gone through. These women in history have been presented to us and, in historical cultures as being evil, because they've lived so long, they must be doing something. They must be killing people. They must be doing something bad. But they're not. They're just survivors, and they look that way. And it's a kind of a double-edged sword because they're presented as, ugly and old and terrible. But at the same time, it's in modern culture, anyway, in our time, we tend to see them as beautiful. Mm-hmm. And these women, these Vulvalinas, are all beautiful. They are old hags, but they are strong. They're alive. They're survivors, and they're beautiful.
And they are still a symbol of hope, because the Keeper of the Seeds, literally, the seeds are the hope. She's been holding on to them. So, even though, maybe they're too old to, literally give birth, they still have this knowledge and this physical embodiment of the future.
Yeah.
That they
hags are wise. Hags are wise. They have knowledge. They have a long life experiences. So they bring that with them, and that may be what has always terrified men in the depiction of that culture, of that kind of woman, is that she's smarter than I am.
The very clear message of the film is that women should be in charge, that a world run by these women is going to be a better world.
That's why I said we should title this segment, or this episode, Put a Woman in Charge. So there are a couple things going on in the ending, and I will talk about this a little bit and then go right into my hot take because it's all related. So Max, at the end of the movie, even though the movie is ostensibly about Mad Max, but we don't know why he's called Mad. But he comes in, and at first he's a reluctant savior. He's a reluctant helper, I should say, because he doesn't really save them. They save themselves. He's reluctant. He becomes a convert, and he is like the cowboy who rides in from the wilderness, comes to save the townspeople, and then leaves because the cowboy can never be a part of the town. And in fact, there's a book that, if readers are interested, it's called The Six Gun Mystique, and it's written by John Cawelty, Cawelti, and I read it 40 years ago in college. It's a great little book. It's not very long, and it talks about the cowboy in mostly in movies, but in novels too. In our modern, and by modern I mean the last 100 years storytelling, since the time of the cowboys ended, we started telling stories about them, and they were basically heroes who helped the town but could not be part of the town. So what happens with Max at the end of the movie is he has to leave. He doesn't have to leave. They would have kept him. They would have accepted him. So, for example, there's an Alan Ladd movie, Shane, where he has somehow defended the town. I don't remember the exact circumstances. It's been 40 years since I've seen it. But he befriends this little boy and his family. Yeah. And the little boy becomes attached to him because he's a big, strong hero. And as strong as their connection is, at the end of it, Alan Ladd's character leaves. Shane leaves. And the little boy is crying, "Don't leave, Shane. Don't leave. Why are you leaving?" But he has to, because once we civilized the West, quote unquote, and towns became the norm instead of just outposts in between, lawless territories, you had to have law and order. And the cowboys were kind of carryover from the period when law and order was, at the point of a gun. He knows he has to leave. He can't be part of the society that they are building. So he has to leave. And this is what's happening with Max at the end of this. He sees that what they're doing is going to be awesome. He knows that she's going to be great. Furiosa is going to do a great job. But he looks at these women and he realizes he is not going to be part of this. He can't be part of this. He is the cowboy. He's the outsider. So if he stays, they could put him in charge because he's a male patriarchal character. But he shouldn't be. He shouldn't be in charge. He knows that. So he knows he has to leave. So he leaves because you have to put the women in charge. And he also doesn't really think he deserves a happy future. I get that impression from him. We don't really know much about Max, which is my big problem with the film. But I get the impression that he feels a lot of guilt over this child's death that he keeps experiencing in his mind. And we don't really know all the circumstances around it, but somehow he failed her. He feels he failed her. So he doesn't really think that he doesn't really think that he deserves a happy future. So he leaves, and, the women are the townspeople whose town has been taken over by the lunatics, led by Joe. And that's a classic kind of cowboy story as well. So my hot take is, for me, at a time when when everything around us seems to feel very broken, to quote Bob Dylan, everything is broken. Watching a post-apocalyptic movie felt a little crazy to me. And maybe at another time it wouldn't have, but I was literally 45 minutes into this and pausing the movie and saying out loud, why am I doing this to myself? Because my already thin stretched optimism has been struggling for almost a year now. And I think we all know in our hearts that we will survive with our humanity and compassion and tact, and surrounded by systems that work, science and art and books and government. And in the end, those things all create hope for the future, which feels a little vacant right now. We don't have that hope right now, even though we know we still have systems in place. In this movie, all their systems have failed, or they've just stopped using them. They have to put new systems in place. Systems are very important in a civilization. So it was a good time to watch the movie, but also a difficult time for me to watch the movie. But I wrote down in my notes, it's all about letting ourselves become addicted to water, because water is the future. It helps things grow. It leads to hope. Water is life. So even if it's hard to know who's more crazy, me or everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's another quote from the film. I guess I'm glad I watched the movie, but it was not easy for me, especially right now.
That is fair. I watched this movie when it first came out, 2015, which was still a pretty optimistic time for the world.
Yeah.
We were
a year before the trauma hit.
Exactly. Obama was still president. It was before we knew how dark things were going to get.
Yep.
So I don't know. I might feel more like you do if I were watching it for the first time this time around. I haven't been as drawn to rewatch the movie lately, in part because I do think it's a little bit too violent, too full of that kind of macho violence to feel escapist for me right now, even though it has in the past. But I totally get why it felt that way to you. And I do think that it is really unfortunate how much the men's attitudes towards ownership of women has become just more and more prevalent in recent years. This movie came out at a time when I think we were really optimistic, and in particular really optimistic about where women's rights were going. We thought that we were really kind of on the up and up, and unfortunately, a year after this, we found out how wrong we were, as Trump rose to power largely on the backs of white male entitlement and resentment towards minorities and women. And I guess I will also just mention, because we haven't mentioned it, this is a very white movie. All of the main characters are played by white people.
Yeah, everybody's white. Is there anybody in that's not white?
There's maybe one extra who was not white, who was visibly not white. It's a little bit hard to tell with the war boys because they are covered in this white paint.
Yeah.
So they're literally white.
Yeah.
Most, if not all, of the characters are played by white people. Oh, there's Zoe Kravitz. Zoe Kravitz is not white. So I guess she's our most important character of color / only. Only speaking character who is not white. And, I do think that's a bit of an oversight. I think they could have very easily had there be more actors of color. I mean, hell, if we're recasting Max, he could have been played by an actor of color. And, I guess I don't mean that to say that anyone didn't put in a great performance. I think that all of the actors were very good at their roles. I love Tom Hardy's performance of Max. I think it's it's oddly adorable. There are just moments of tenderness on his face that make him very endearing.
Yes. I found myself thinking while I watched him, I don't consciously remember seeing him in any other movies. I need to go see some of his movies, because he really did impress me despite not having a lot of dialogue. His acting was superb.
It
You
was
could
great,
see
yeah.
so much on his face. It was just amazing. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job.
I also really like Charlize Theron's performance. I mean, I don't disagree when you say that she's, reserved.
One-dimensional, subdued.
I mean, I don't really think she's one-dimensional, but subdued for sure. But she does a lot of physical stuff in this movie.
She did. She really did.
And she does it so well. For the role that she was given, she did a great job. She really proved that she can carry an action movie in this movie.
And she's an actress who takes chances. Wasn't she in the Kill Bill films?
I don't think so. That was Uma Thurman.
I thought that... Oh, no. Okay. She was in a movie about a mass murderer, though. She played
Monster.
a murderer. That's what it was. Yeah. So she was in Monster.
I think that was the movie that really kind of changed her career around. I think before that, she had largely been cast as, like, beautiful kind
Pretty
of
girl.
Damsels in distress. And she really wanted to get more interesting roles than that. And I think that's why she was in Monster, which I actually haven't seen, but my understanding is that she's incredible in it.
I haven't seen it either, and maybe we should add it to our list. Let me write it down right now.
Yeah, I'd be down to give it a shot. But as for hot takes, I mean, honestly, most of my opinions on this movie are pretty mainstream. I like it. I like a stupid action movie. My take on it that is probably the most controversial, particularly among the men who like this movie, is that this movie is drag. This movie is doing drag. It is doing the film equivalent of drag. It is camp. It is intentionally over the top.
It is campy. I will give you that.
And I feel like it's a little bit of a queer sensibility. I think anytime you really delve into a hyper masculine culture, it gets a little gay.
It's not as campy as The Fifth Element, which did,
for sure.
I think did campy a lot better, but yeah, I'll give you that. Okay.
The Fifth Element definitely has a lot more like high fashion going on. You cannot argue that this film is high fashion for sure.
No.
But I do think it's camp, and I think that's what I like about it. I guess I should also say that this time around, I watched the black and white version. I've seen the full color version several times, and when I looked to watch this online, an option came up that they call it black and chrome, of course. Apparently, George Miller actually initially wanted to release it in black and white, but I guess he was overruled. I think they assumed that a full color version would do better. And the colors for the movie are very strong. So I like the full color version, but watching the black and white version was interesting. I do think there were some details that I picked up on that I don't think I had picked up on before. For instance, Splendid's face is like covered in scars, and I don't think I could see that in the full color version, but you can see it very clearly in the black and white version.
Okay. Hey.
I'm also not sure if I had ever noticed before that on the side of the war rig where Furiosa sits, on the door, there's a skeletal arm there, like carved into the door.
I did notice that.
Yeah.
I did notice that.
And maybe I've noticed that before, but it's just so stark in the black and white version that like every time it pops up, you see it. So George Miller wants you to see it in black and white. So if you haven't seen it in black and white, I do recommend it. But I don't know that you necessarily need to see it in black and white over the color version. Maybe if you are the kind of person who gets overwhelmed by the visuals, it might actually be a bit easier to watch it in black and white because it's, there's no color, so there's a little bit less craziness going on, and some of the details become a little bit easier to pick out. I think that's pretty much it. I really liked this movie, but I understand why you did not.
I appreciate the movie. I didn't love it. It was hard to get through. I'm glad I watched it. I will probably never watch it again.
I do think it is really unfortunate that the masculinity in this movie has only become more relevant over time.
Yeah, it is sad. Well, that, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women in movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tess Adair. You can find me at my website, tessadair.com, or you can follow me on Threads at author.tess.adair. If you would like to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth. If you're watching us on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe.
And I am Beth Von Baron. You can sign up for my weekly Substack, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at stl_writer_Beth, and on Blue Sky at stlwriterbeth.bsky.social. Thank you for listening. Please join us again in about 2 weeks.